Yo, guy, we just got the good news. Our realtor just repriced our home and sold it ASAP, and we're ready to act smart. The money should be in the account. You want to get a check and invest it? Can you check that out for us?
That's fantastic. A really smart decision, young man. We can put that check in a money market mutual fund. Then we'll reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
And we're back. Yo, people of YouTube, welcome to my channel. I'm Misha Jindu, or Zinyati, soon to be Zimbabwe's top real estate agent. And as such, I am here to educate and inform you, the future buyers, sellers, tenants, and landlords of today and tomorrow, on everything you need to know to real estate right. And where better to start our inevitable partnership than me educating you on how exactly your property is going to be priced on the market. If there was ever a number one fear in the world of property transactions, it would be selling your property at too low a price and buying a property at too high a price. Nobody likes to feel ripped off. And as a particular note of reference to my DIY property sellers out there, you tend to have a particular problem of overvaluing your properties at too high a price. I mean, I understand those cracks, chips, and leaky ceiling aren't property defects, they're property heritage. But these other people unfortunately don't get it. And as such, it leads to adding to your frustrations and not your wallet. So for you and everyone else who's going to come to a real estate agent like moi, this video is going to give you a crash course introduction to the hows and whys of pricing your property right on the market. So subscribe for real, like this video, share this video, and let's get into it. Before we talk about the hows and whats of pricing your property right, let's briefly talk about the whys. There are two main reasons as to why when you enter the real estate transaction market, you want to make sure you know how exactly your property is being priced and you know it's priced properly at the start. As I briefly mentioned before, number one, if you price your property incorrectly at the start, your property isn't leaving the market. Fact, people who are buying property are far more cautious than people who are selling property. They hire the best to review it to make sure they're not being cheated, agents, evaluators, even your state council. So you as a property seller are probably not going to be able to get one over a property buyer. So just price your property right from the start, collect your money, and ride off into the sunset. And number two, if you price your property right from the start, it's less likely someone's going to drag it through the mud for a critical inspection on every nook and cranny. If you price your property way too high, people get suspicious. And when they get suspicious, they're doing everything they possibly can to look at every corner, nook, and cranny to uncover what's wrong with your property. And when they do this, they'll typically find an angle to squeeze you on in order to value your property far less than it actually goes for. If you play with fire, they'll play with fire. If everyone comes together wanting to work together, it's better off for everyone. So now that we've gotten that bit of house cleaning done and dusted, let's actually move to understanding how exactly is your property priced and what exactly are people, agents, and governments looking at to value your property. All in all, there are three classes of variables that influence exactly how much your property is going to be valued at on the market. Property, person, province. Starting out with the most obvious variable to how your property is priced, it's your property. The condition, state, and environment of the thing you're selling has a pretty big influence on how much you can sell it for. Within the property class, there are three main variables: neighborhood and location, plot size and property size, and condition of the property. Kicking it off with neighborhood and location, there are very few variables that have as much influence on the valuation of your property than where it's located regarding its neighborhood. Area crime rate, cleanliness, proximity to amenities like hospitals, shopping malls, and schools, and pretty much anything else you can consider in your neighborhood that someone else would have to live with if they moved into your property. Whether it's a plus, increases the price of your property, or whether it's a negative, decreases the value of your property. People will pay a lot for comfort, convenience, and security, and they'll inversely pay very little when very little is offered. And after the neighborhood and location of your property, next is the plot size and the property size of your property. All things being equal to an extent in real estate, financially speaking, bigger is always better. to an extent. Similar sized properties in the same neighborhood are all playing in the same valuation game park. And typically, the bigger the home is and the bigger the plot size is, the more the price creeps up to an extent. But size as a factor alone is rarely the best measure of how to value a property. Even if properties are similar in size, there's always our third and final variable in the property class that needs to be evaluated, and that is provision. Or to be more accurate, condition and provision. Conditioning is evaluating the state of everything that's going to be transferred in the property transaction. And I do mean everything. Home buyers can tend to be very Inspector Gadget when it comes to making sure they know exactly what they're buying. So big things like risky structural integrity of a property or little things like peeling paint or cracks in the wall are probably all going to be put into consideration. If the future buyer is going to be responsible for it in the future, your wallet is going to be responsible for it before the purchase. And equally as important as the condition of everything that's on offer is actually what's on offer, aka the provisions of the property. And similarly to plot size and property size, the valuation of provision is tightly linked to the neighborhood and the location of your property. The number of bedrooms, bathrooms, the inclusion of special amenities like swimming pools, cottages, home theaters, whatever is there becomes more important to how your property is valued if it's also there at the neighbors' houses. If you saw 3 properties in the same neighborhood and they all had a swimming pool, best believe most of them, if not all of them, have a swimming pool. And the one that doesn't have a swimming pool is probably the least valued one in the neighborhood. Slight deviation renovations from the norm can help bolster the valuation of your property a little bit. But both extremes of being too far behind the neighborhood norm or over renovating so far ahead that your property is the odd one out in the neighborhood will always negatively hinder your property. Very few people like to stick out like a sore thumb in a neighborhood. So just keep that in mind. The next class of variable that influences the value of your property is person. Person as in you, the home seller. And the 2 variables specific to the person category are urgency and opportunity. Urgency is a variable that's rooted in the fact that at the end of the day, property transactions are rarely ever just property transactions like going to a store, seeing how much the object costs, paying that amount of price. Instead, property transactions are usually property negotiations, where one side wants to charge as much as they can for the property and the other side wants to buy for as little as they can. And unfortunately, as much as we like to romanticize compromising, it rarely ever ends in a situation where both parties left off on equal footing. There are always variables that leverage someone else's power over the other person. To the potential buyer of the property, the main leverage variable is usually competition. How many people want the property influences how much you're going to get it for. The more people want the property, the more leverage the seller has. And that's equally the case for the buyer. But the buyer does have one specific leverage variable that usually only influences them, and that is urgency. How quickly do you have to sell your property? The quicker an agent needs to sell a property, the more rare it becomes that they're gonna sell it at a price that's beneficial to them. The further your deadline for selling is, the more you can accrue more competition for the property, and the more likely you're gonna raise the value of your property through bidding for your property. The second variable under the person class is opportunity. Specifically, opportunity, willingness, and capability of enforcing renovations onto your property. Remember when we were in the property class and we talked about condition and provision? Essentially, in the person class, opportunity is all about bringing to life what your property's condition and provision could be if you invested in it. Under property, provision and condition is what your property is now at the moment. And equally to property's condition and provision, opportunity is focused on repairs, renovations, and remodeling. Everything I'm going to go in depth on my next video, talking about the good, the bad, and the just why renovations you can do to your property. So make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to stay notified for when that video comes out. There's a lot you can do to raise your property's value and decrease your property's value as long as you know what's up. So make sure you tune in. And finally, on our property pricing journey is a variable that's both probably the most influential and also the least in your control. There is province. And province comes down to your country, your economy, and your state. And though I can probably feel you speculating that isn't this just the same as location and neighborhood? No. Compared to province, the variables involved in neighborhood and location are far more controllable and malleable than those involved in province. When it comes to location and neighborhood, the right people moving in or the right businesses moving in can always influence the valuations of properties in that area. But when it comes to province, it pretty much sets a boundary for the average cost of properties in that area. And this is because the factors that affect province are largely fixed in nature. The state of the economy at the current stage, the amount of land available to build real estate, and the availability of resources that are needed to construct the properties, as well as the overall demand. Province is largely the number one factor in affecting the cost of your property, and it's why all across the world, if we took a random figure like a property for $1 million US, if you wanted to use that money in Hong Kong to buy a property, we could barely get the space of an apartment. But if we went somewhere like West Virginia, we'd pretty much be living lavish. 5 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, game rooms, large yard, media rooms, 6 parking lots, everything. Always remember, when it comes to real estate, it's not always about how much you spent on the property, and it can often be more about where did you spend how much on the property. Nothing affects the price of your property more than where your property is located in the grand scheme of things. And now, my future and current subscribers and clients, you've come to the end of the video and you're no longer a pricing newbie. And even though I strongly encourage you to get a professional to value your property if you want to put it on the market, real estate agents or property evaluators or your city state council, you're at least not completely out of the loop. Make sure you tune in next week for the do's and don'ts of upgrading your property. And for now, I've been your host, Ishe Jindu or Zinyati. Subscribe for real, like this video, share this video, and I'll see you next week. Peace.